20 men left Nantucket on a routine whaling voyage. 14 months later, only 8 of them were still alive. The ship had not sunk in a storm, had not been lost in fog, and had not run aground on a reef. It had been rammed, deliberately and repeatedly, by the animal they had sailed halfway around the world to hunt. That fact alone raises the central question of this episode. Not how the Essex was destroyed, but how any of her crew survived at all. Because surviving the attack was only the beginning of the problem. The Essex was an American whaling ship out of Nantucket, Massachusetts, launched in 1799 and unremarkable by the standards of her trade. Under the command of Captain George Pollard Jr., she carried a crew of 20 men into the southern Pacific Ocean on a voyage designed to return with oil. Whaling in 1820 was a methodical, dangerous, and economically essential industry. The men aboard knew the risks of the sea and the risks of the whale. What they could not have anticipated was the specific sequence of events that would begin on November 20th, 1820. On that date, roughly 2,000 nautical miles from the coast of South America, a sperm whale attacked the ship. Not a glancing blow, not a defensive strike from a harpooned animal. The whale rammed the Essex with enough force to sink her. The crew escaped into 3 whaleboats with whatever food and water they could salvage from the wreck before the ship went down. What they had salvaged was not enough, not nearly enough. The position mattered enormously. 2,000 nautical miles, roughly 3,700 kilometers, from South America placed the crew far beyond any realistic expectation of passing ships or coastal rescue. They were in open ocean, in small open boats, with finite provisions under equatorial sun. The nearest land was not a destination anyone would choose. The Marquesas Islands lay closer in raw distance, but the crew reportedly feared those islands, and the decision was made to sail for South America instead. That decision extended the journey by thousands of additional miles and weeks of additional time at sea. This is where the disaster became a survival crisis of a different order. In the days immediately following the sinking, the men dealt with the most immediate physical constraints: exposure to sun and salt air, the rapid depletion of fresh water, and the problem of 3 small boats carrying 20 men across open ocean with no prospect of resupply. Whaleboats were built for short, aggressive work, pursuing and killing whales at close range, then returning to the mothership. They were not provisioned or designed for transoceanic passage. Sleeping, rationing, and navigating in them for days, then weeks, compressed every physical difficulty. Dehydration and starvation worked on a predictable timeline, and the timeline was not kind. As provisions shrank, the crew's physical condition deteriorated in ways that compounded every other problem. Weakness made navigation harder, exposure worsened. The capacity to make decisions, to manage the boats, to maintain direction, to respond to weather, declined alongside caloric intake. The 3 boats became separated over time. Men died. The record documents that the survivors, facing starvation at sea with no rescue in sight, resorted to consuming the bodies of those who had died. Maritime history records this practice in extreme cases of shipwreck disaster, and the Essex case became one of its most documented examples. The source material does not support specific attributions of who decided what or when, and this account will not supply those details. What the record establishes is the physical reality. 20 men entered the open Pacific in 3 small boats, and the attrition over the following weeks was severe. The narrowest point of the crisis arrived not with the whale attack, but with the accumulated weeks of open ocean survival. Options that had existed at the beginning, altering course, signaling passing ships, reaching land sooner, had closed one by one as the boats drifted and the men weakened. By the time rescue became possible, the crew had been reduced to a fraction of its original number, scattered across separate boats, and pushed well past the physical limits that most people will ever approach. 8 of the original 20 survived. The rescues came from ships that encountered the surviving boats after months at sea. The men who were found were, by every account, severely physically deteriorated. Not a dramatic cinematic rescue, but a grim intersection of an exhausted crew and passing vessels in the Pacific. Captain Pollard was among those rescued. Owen Chase, the ship's first mate, also survived. Thomas Nickerson, one of the youngest crew members, survived as well, and lived long enough that decades later, his account of events would be sought out as a first-hand record of what had happened. According to the film record, Nickerson was still alive to be identified as the last survivor of the Essex. The physical aftermath was considerable. Men who had survived months of starvation and exposure in open boats required extended recovery. The psychological consequences for the survivors lasted far longer. Captain Pollard attempted to return to sea and commanded another vessel, which was also wrecked, though by grounding, not attack. Owen Chase continued his maritime career. The story they carried with them was not widely publicized in their lifetimes, in part because what had happened at sea was not something easily spoken of. The Essex disaster would not reach its widest audience until nearly 2 centuries after the event, when Nathaniel Philbrick reconstructed it in the Heart of the Sea, published in 2000 and awarded the National Book Award for Nonfiction that same year. Philbrick's account drew on Chase's narrative, Nickerson's manuscript, and other primary sources to reconstruct the conditions, decisions, and sequence of the survival ordeal. A film adaptation followed in 2015, directed by Ron Howard, which brought the story to a still larger audience. What the Essex case demonstrates, specifically and without extrapolation, is how a single catastrophic event can collapse a carefully planned operation into a survival problem that multiplies faster than any prepared response can match. The crew were experienced maritime workers. Their captain held command. They had functional boats and some provisions. None of that prevented the cascading deterioration that followed, because the core variable, distance from any possible help, removed the margin that competence and preparation normally provide. 2,000 nautical miles is not a dramatic abstraction. It is a measurement of how far outside the range of rescue a person can find themselves before a single irreversible event occurs. The Essex crew did not fail. They faced a set of physical constraints that the technology, geography, and knowledge of 1820 could not reliably overcome. 8 of them found a way through it anyway. The question that remains, and that the record cannot fully answer, is what distinguished the 8 who survived from the 12 who did not. The sources do not support a clean answer. Chance, position, which boat a man was in, and the specific timing of rescue all appear to have played significant roles alongside physical resilience and the decisions made under extreme duress. That uncertainty is itself part of what the Essex case contributes to the historical record. It is a story about the limits of human endurance tested against one of the longest open ocean survival ordeals in documented maritime history, and about the fact that, against all reasonable expectation, some of those limits held.